Hello and welcome to Italy Beyond the Guidebook. One of the reasons people visit Florence is to see Michelangelo's David, whether that's in the Accademia or outside the Palazzo Vecchio. But there are many versions of him dotted around the city. He turned up in stone, bronze, paint, on wedding chests and bedroom tapestries for about 500 years. Before we go hunting him around the city, I think we need to ask the obvious question: why him? Of all the biblical figures they could have picked, why did the Florentines fall so hard for a shepherd boy with a sling?
Because he was a symbol of both religious and civic pride. It was through his strength, virtue, good governance, courage, faith, that he became the defender of his people of liberation. Florence was a city-state forever battling to defend itself from often more powerful forces. David was their ultimate icon.
Okay, but who is David?
Well, Saul, at the insistence of the people, is made king, but he wasn't God's choice. So Samuel is sent to find God's chosen one among the sons of Jesse, and he realizes that it's the youngest son, the shepherd boy David, whom he blesses. As a young boy, David developed great skill in fighting against predators to keep his flock safe, and music. And David entered into the court of King Saul as a musician to soothe the tormented king who had been rejected by God. Then we have the most famous episode. We have the war between the Israelites and the Philistines. On one side for the Philistines, we have this huge giant Goliath, and he's basically goading them, taunting them. Who'll come and fight? A personal battle. No one volunteers until our young shepherd boy, there to see his brothers, volunteers. David picks up a rock, which he places within his sling. He swings the sling, he fires the rock, and it hits Goliath right in the center of the forehead. Stunned, Goliath falls to the ground. David takes the sword from Goliath, chops off his head, and saves the Israelites. This biblical episode of David versus Goliath is the ultimate symbol of the victory of courage, intellect, and faith over brutality.
A perfect ending then. No wonder they wanted him.
Well, not quite a perfect ending, because King Saul, even though he appoints David as commander of the army, even allows the marriage of his daughter to David, Saul is jealous of David's popularity, and he attempted to assassinate him. And David fled, pursued relentlessly by his king. There's continued fighting against the Philistines, and King Saul, his son Jonathan, were killed. David was then anointed king. However, there's no end to the strife when Saul's other son is anointed king, so thus dividing Israel between the two camps. Ishbosheth is murdered, and David then becomes king of a united Israel. But even so, there's even problems within David's own family when David's son, Amnon, will rape his sister Tamar. In reprisal, his other son, Absalom, will kill Amnon. Absalom is going to revolt against his father, and civil war will ensue, ending with the death of Absalom. And this particular episode we actually find within the Cathedral of Siena. The floor of the cathedral is basically a book written in marble, and there are 56 panels that draw inspiration from the Old and the New Testament and from the ancient world. And one of the panels is the story of Absalom, and we see his hair become entangled within a branch of a tree, and he's stuck. And this was why he was able to be killed. David ruled for 33 years. He conquered Jerusalem and named it the City of David. David, however, is not without sin. He committed adultery with Bathsheba. He had a husband move to the front line in battle where he was killed. David marries Bathsheba, who's already pregnant with their first child. Their first son dies as punishment for their sin. Their second son, Solomon, survives. David died in 970 BC, buried in Jerusalem with his successor, Solomon, as king.
Oh, no
Quite the
problems in
story.
that family then. Okay, so where does David show up first in Florence?
So one of the first places in which David was depicted was within the baptistry of Florence. And he's located on the northeast side in one of the parapets of the Women's Gallery, adorned with mosaic panels which date from the 1300s. These panels, they depict busts of prophets on a gold background, and they're each identified by inscriptions, and they're holding unrolled and inscribed scrolls. The theory is that these saints of the Old Testament are attending the liturgy from celestial seats and are welcoming the baptized.
Okay. But he's not just on the inside of the baptistry either, he's also hanging about on the outside too.
He is. He's on the east doors of the baptistry. The 17-foot tall, 3-ton bronze doors, in fact, by Lorenzo Ghiberti. And we find David on the 9th panel, and we find him in the foreground as our young shepherd boy in the act of chopping the head off of Goliath.
That was easy to say, wasn't it? And they were sorry, and they were so beautiful. The Michelangelo, even Michelangelo was impressed by them, wasn't he?
He was, yeah. They're called the Gates of Paradise due to their location, basically, facing the cathedral. So they believe that the space between the cathedral and the baptistry is paradise.
Okay. Why would I think that would be purgatory? Just because I suppose it's a space and you're not in one thing or the other. But anyway, that's just me.
After your baptism, then you exit from the east doors. The sun rises in the east. So you enter into enlightenment in paradise, and then you go inside the cathedral, continue your spiritual journey.
Oh, well, I didn't know that. There you go. Every day's a learning day. So, before Ghiberti, who, of course, beat Brunelleschi to those doors, and if you want to know more about Brunelleschi, he was in a previous episode, there was already a set of doors there, clearly. What can you tell us about those?
Well, the first set of baptistry doors are by an artist called Andrea Pisano, and his doors had 20 scenes of the life of St. John. Andrea Pisano becomes the master builder for the cathedral works upon the death of his predecessor Giotto in the 1330s. So Andrea Pisano continued sculpting prophets, sibyls, including King David and Solomon for the north side of the bell tower. And this is where we find our first statue of David. And he's carved from Carrara marble. We know the Carrara marble quarries are not far from Florence, and he's depicted as the king, a king with a furrowed brow, a beard, wearing an octagonal crown, the symbol of eternity. His cloak is clasped together with the Star of David. The drapery falls in heavy folds, and part of which is hanging over one arm. He's also holding a scroll with a psalm, and it's written, "Blessed or happy is the man." I often forget to mention that David is actually credited with writing many of the Psalms in the Bible. If they think about 73 religious poems or songs. So the book of Psalms in the Old Testament, which are traditionally attributed to King David. And the most well-known is Psalm 23, and "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want."
Tempting as it is, I'm not going to sing it. So that's the prophet king. He's thoroughly religious, but you said there's a hinge point. There's a hinge point when he stops being less about God to the Florentines and more about Florence itself.
Yeah, and this is where we move. We move to the Bargello Museum, and the Bargello Museum is actually one of the oldest buildings of Florence. Dates from 1255. It was once the captain's palace. a prison, place of execution, and today, as I said, it's a brilliant state museum with more than one David in there.
I love the Bargello. It's probably my favourite. Okay, so let's start with one of the Donatellos that's in the Bargello.
So we have a marble David by Donatello, and this is actually one of his earliest sculptures. He's 22 years old, and he's carved a very graceful and elegant David with an elongated body curved into an S shape. He's almost this pillar of strength with confidence standing on his parted legs. A Roman soldier clothed with a mantle, symbol of this divine protection. It was meant for the cathedral to be placed on the choir gallery. It was repositioned, however, to the Palazzo Vecchio, so the seat of government. Therefore, Donatello modified it to make it less religious and more civic. And he put an inscription on it. The inscription reads, "God always helps those who fight for their country, even against very powerful enemies."
And that's not abstract, clearly. There's a real political moment that's behind that inscription.
Yeah, our historical background knowledge helps us to understand the significance of a work of art, and there are many layers of meaning. So the background knowledge is we have the ruler of Milan, we have Gian Galeazzo Visconti, and he's tried to capture Florence. Fortunately for the Florentines, he died. His army retreats, and Florence was thus saved. Now, the Florentines saw this as God's protection and a victory. A small and virtuous republic, i.e. Florence, had defeated with God's help the large forces of the tyrant Visconti. This episode signified that virtue can triumph over strength.
So that is the triumph over very powerful enemies. Yes, as per the inscription. And then Donatello does David again, but a few decades later, and this is probably my favourite version, and it's completely different to the first one you did.
Yeah, this time we have a bronze David, and this is one of the most celebrated of all Donatello's works because David, well, this was commissioned in 1440, and it's very unique. Bronze statue. It's very mysterious as a figure. It's quite erotic. It's quite sensual, almost effeminate because we have David with long hair. He's almost wearing these kinky boots. And, we have the head of Goliath underneath his foot, and the feather from Goliath's helmet is almost caressing the leg and almost, his inner thigh and almost reaching and tickling his genitalia. It was commissioned by the Medici family along with another bronze statue of Judith and Holofernes. Now, one of them was meant for the Medici courtyard, the other for their garden. Now, this bronze statue by Donatello was the first life-size, freestanding bronze figure cast in the Renaissance after antiquity. Now, the Medici family, they styled themselves as protectors of Florence, and they adopted David as a symbol of their rule within the city. Now, it gets moved to the Palazzo Vecchio, so the seat of government, when the Medici family are exiled. And it again becomes a symbol of a republican Florence, of liberty. So it has a complete 360 in terms of its meaning.
They do like a David at the Palazzo Vecchio. That's basically the answer, isn't it? There's a third David, though, isn't there, in the Medici orbit?
And this one is by Verrocchio. Now, Verrocchio, he's one of the most inventive sculptors of his generation, and he had a desire to surpass others and himself. And Donatello for him was a reference point. Verrocchio will also become the favourite sculptor for the Medici family. Now, his David, again commissioned to him by the Medici family, following a failed plot against them. And so this was called the Pitti Conspiracy. Now, Verrocchio's David is no longer nude. is he's depicted as a very contemporary Florentine youth. He's very slender, looks very agile, almost a page boy, proud of his achievement. He's flaunting his bravado and is dressed almost as if he's a page boy from the Medicean court. He's got a hand on his hip. The sword moves away from his body. His shoulders and neck turn. He's almost attempting to engage us in the moment of his victory. Now, Verrocchio had a very large and important workshop in Florence with many students. Workshop assistants, students, they often stood as models. And it's been suggested that this statue of David is modelled on Leonardo da Vinci, who was a student of Verrocchio. Now, this bronze statue by Verrocchio was again unique because it was the first that was sculpted and cast by the same artist.
And now for the one that everyone's come here for, probably. Michelangelo's David.
Michelangelo's David is the world's most famous statue and the first freestanding colossal nude carved from a single piece of marble since antiquity. Michelangelo's David is a symbol of moral and anatomical perfection.
Okay. Now he's nude. And then Verrocchio's wasn't nude.
Well, but see, because Donatello, his bronze David is nude. So Michelangelo's David is not the first nude statue, but it is the first colossal nude statue since antiquity.
But what is it then about being nude and not being nude? Why is there the change in meaning between nudity from one period
in the Middle
to the
Ages? Because in the Middle Ages, nudity was associated with sin. You know, Adam and Eve being banished from the Garden of Eden. In the Renaissance, nudity becomes purity. Michelangelo's David, if you go and visit him, is uncircumcised because spiritually he's perfect. And he's nude because all David needs is faith in God. And we have to remember that man has been made in the image of God. Now, this is why it changes.
Perfect.
There's no longer sinful. It's, rediscovering the beauty of the human body.
The thing with David, I mean, if you do go and have a look at him outside, well, whether you go to the Accademia or you look at the copy outside the Palazzo Vecchio, you say that he's anatomically correct, but he looks a smidgy bit out of proportion, doesn't he? Because he wasn't meant to be.
Yeah, but again, it's like many of them, they're commissioned for, say, for example, Michelangelo's David was commissioned for one of the buttresses of the cathedral, so it would have been placed up high. But because of things changing, he changes from this religious figure to be on the cathedral to again to be one of liberty. So again, he's placed again in front of the Palazzo Vecchio, so the seat of government. And he was placed there when the Medici family had been exiled. And he stands outside there for 369 years, and his face is turning towards the direction of Rome, where the enemy, the Medici, were plotting their return.
Okay.
So again, it's all about having this background knowledge of who's being exiled, who's in charge. Yeah.
Why they're that side of the door, why they're wherever. Yeah, okay. Now, the other thing, of course, about Michelangelo's David is he still has that rock. He still has the stone. So he's being depicted before the slaughter of Goliath.
Yeah, so unlike the others that were victorious with the head of Goliath underneath their foot, Michelangelo has carved his David before the event. So he's still got the sling on his shoulder and he's just looking at his adversary. So completely different. Yeah.
And he's frowning a lot, isn't he, really?
Yeah, he's a young adult male, okay, before the event. And again, the thing with Michelangelo is that he'll often carve things not to show how brilliant an artist he is, not necessarily to depict something you think it should be. So all the
Okay.
others,
So what you're saying is basically is if everybody else has depicted David at the moment of victory or just after, because they've all got, Goliath's severed head somewhere lurking around them. Michelangelo's doing it to show another point of view, and something different, to be different, basically, not to
yeah,
follow the
to
trends.
show what a great artist he is, to differentiate himself between other artists. A lot of it also has got a lot to do with the marble. And really, with regards to Michelangelo's David, is the story of the marble that also lends the genius to Michelangelo. But he doesn't depict, for example, he carves statues of the Medici family in the Medici chapels. And the story is that people came in and said, well, that doesn't look anything like Lorenzo. And he said, well, who's going to know in years to come what they look like? But they'll know that I carved it.
Wow, ego. Don't care about the fact that it looks like Lorenzo or not. It's a bloke, and my name's the important
He's
one.
showing his genius in terms of how he's carved it, and that different aspect and not what you think it should be.
Okay. Still quite a bit of ego at play, though, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, back to the script. So, where where can we go and see the Davids today? The one that's in the Palazzo Vecchio isn't the original. The
No.
original.
So the original is in the Accademia Museum, and there are basically two copies of David in terms of same size. So we have the first is a bronze, which was cast by Clemente Papi, and that today stands in the Piazzale Michelangelo, who's surveying the city. It's a very lovely viewpoint of the whole of Florence. The second is of marble, and it stands where the original once stood, and it's by Luigi Erighetti. Now, there are lots of copies of David, and they estimate there are about between 30 and 50 copies of him. And in fact, in 1994, a copy was offered to Jerusalem to commemorate 3,000 years of the conquest of the city. This offer was not accepted because of his nudity. So instead, the Florentines sent Verrocchio's version, our little page boy. Now, there are thousands of little small David souvenirs as well, so throughout the city.
God, yeah, you can't turn without falling over a David. So that's the sculpture side done of David, but he turns up in paintings as well, and slightly different take on the whole thing here.
Yeah, there are paintings of David and Goliath, which are not to be confused with Judith and Holofernes, because a lot of, chopped heads being held aloft.
Let's start with the one that was forgotten in a storeroom.
This is actually by Artemis Gentileschi, and it's was found in the Pitti Palace. In 2009, a lady called Jane Fortune, who is the founder of the chair of the Florentine Committee for the National Museum of Women, she actually found this painting within a storage area. And it's of David and Bathsheba. And they actually paid for the restoration of the painting, which actually recounts when David first saw Bathsheba, and he sees her bathing in the garden. He summons her to his palace, and as we know, the rest, they say, is history. Artemisa, in her painting, focuses her attention on Bathsheba and her handmaidens. David is in the background. He's on the left-hand corner of the loggia. And this painting was commissioned to Artemisa by, again, a Medici. So we've got to Ferdinand II. So we're talking the early 1600s.
And then we're going to go a bit even racier, not just a nudist.
This time we go into the Uffizi and to a painter called Guido Reni, who was a painter from Bologna, but he worked in Rome. He worked for the Borghese family and for a pope, Pope Paul V. The painting, the Uffizi, is located next to the works of Caravaggio, because you do see the influence of Caravaggio in this particular work by Guido Reni. And so we find our young David, and he's got a red hat, and there's a long feather protruding from his hat. Now, we've seen feathers before. In particular, we saw it on Donatello's bronze David. Now, uccello in Italian, or bird, was Florentine slang for phallus. So there again, there's almost this sexual energy to it. It's almost emphasizing his desirability. He's arousing passion in all its forms, be it anger, fantasy, lust. And we find our David by Guido almost contemplating what's happened, looking at the giant's head quite nonchalantly, as quite holding him, holding Goliath's head by his hair. The sword's on the ground. He's got his legs crossed, leaning against a pillar. It's all quite casual, holding the sling. And we find our, young David illuminated in lights. We have this very pale, untouched skin as contrast against the very darker skin tone of Goliath. So almost this silvery blue skin tone alludes to the coldness of David observing Goliath. It's it's quite emotionless. It's a brilliant painting. Yep. So now we're going to move to the museum. We're going to go to the Horn Museum.
Going somewhere.
We're going somewhere. We're going to a museum or a museo. So we go Herbert Horn. Who is he? Well, he was born in London. He moves to Florence. He's a scholar, a collector, and he buys a 15th century palace and he restores it into a Renaissance or noble or merchant's home with furniture and paintings to match. And so inside we've got a painting by the Florentine school, and it's showing us the triumph of David. So again, David killing Goliath. And it's actually a painting on a 15th century marriage chest. It's called cassoni in Italian. Now, these cassoni or chests were given to the new brides and were often decorated with biblical or mythological scenes and stories of morality that were to teach or instill to the bride how they should behave in marriage, almost to maintain her virtues within marriage as well. There is another panel as well, so they almost form a pair, and the second is the Triumph of David. Again, is by this Florentine school, and together they display the battle and the subsequent victory parade.
I'm still not convinced that David lopping off Goliath's head is possibly the best subject matter for a marriage chest.
I suppose it's all to do with virtue.
What, try it on, mate, and I'll take your head off?
No, David's virtue. And brides have to be virtuous,
that's what I mean.
don't they?
So she's the virtuous one, she's David, and if the husband tries something he's not supposed to do,
Well,
Off
that's
it
maybe
comes.
our take on it. Not quite what
May-
was intended.
or maybe not. Maybe they were talking about heads, but, you know. Anyway. So before we wrap up, let's go back to Bathsheba. And she's on the wall.
This time, yeah, we're going to go to the Palazzo Davanzati. It's a bit like the Horn Museum, but it's the Palazzo Davanzati is almost a rare survivor from the 19th century urban renewal and demolition that took place in Florence. Again, it is a Florentine house, and it was bought by an antique dealer who immediately began restoring it. And so inside, this time we've got a cycle of 6 tapestries illustrating the story of David and Bathsheba that once belonged to the Medici collections. They attribute them to a Flemish workshop, possibly from Brussels, dating from the early 16th century. And they believe that the tapestries were within the Medici's collections, and they believed that they were bed canopy valances, and they were on the ground floor chamber of the Palazzo Medici on Via Larga, and they believed that they were owned by Alessandro de' Medici. Now, Alessandro de' Medici will actually be assassinated by his cousin, and so his collection, so what he owned, would then be transferred to his successor, who is Cosimo the Fair. So it's either through inheritance or Cosimo paid for them. So he bought them from the widow of Alessandro de' Medici.
So there we have it. We have gone from a shepherd boy with a sling to the Piazza della Signora's most photographed backside and other bits. Obviously, I refer to his hand. David really did become Florence's whole personality. He was a religious symbol. He was a civic mascot. He was the Republican rallying cry. And now it's merchandise. And that, my friends, is what happens. So next, we're going to be taking a sip of the dark stuff and look at Italy's relationship with it. Yep, coffee. Trade, coffee houses, political intrigue, and when you should risk ordering a cappuccino.